Hello, friends. Today I read a quote that put such a big smile on my face because it reminded me of one of the most important discoveries I've ever made in my entire life. And the quote goes like this: In the midst of winter, I found there was within me an invincible summer. In the midst of winter, I found within me there was an invincible summer. An invincible summer. Who wouldn't want an invincible summer? It reminded me of the moment when I discovered this within myself, this place within myself that turned out to be so much more pervasive throughout life than I realized. But at the time, I found finally a place within myself. And I found this invincible summer in a moment of most profound and painful suffering, which made it all the more invincible in a sense. It wasn't a product of a wonderful, charmed, lovely experience. This invincible summer was found in the midst, as the quote says, of a painful winter. Here's the situation. I had been in my relationship for about 3 or 4 years, and I had put my partner on this huge pedestal. Looking back, it's very obvious to see how my mind had really clinged on to this person in the hope that because they seemed to me to be good and smart and worthy, that if they choose me, then by proxy, I must also be worthy. And of course, that was a really problematic basis for a relationship. And so, despite there being some very wonderful things about this partnership, one day the worst happened. He came home and he said to me, I don't want to be with you anymore. And there was a short period where I was desperately trying to talk him out of it, trying to seek a way to make this not true. And yet he was absolutely steadfast. And thank goodness he was, because otherwise I would never have found this invincible summer. And when it became apparent that he was unmoving in his determination to end this relationship, I thankfully, by some grace, had learned enough to know that the only thing to do, the only thing left to do, was to batten down the hatches and sit on the couch and let myself feel the apparently unbearable feelings that were telling me this was an absolutely devastating, terrible moment in my life. And so I woke up the next day, I sat on the couch, and I determined that I would not move until I had felt kinesthetically in my body every sinew, every movement of this agony, this anxious, fearful, frightening feeling of my world falling apart. I would let myself feel it all until, well, who knows what. I had no idea what would happen. Nothing could have prepared me for the delight, actually. And so I sat there, and in that moment, I really just let the grief and the sadness and the terror all have its way with me. If it's going to destroy me, so be it. If it's going to rip me apart, so be it. And I let all these intense emotions that my mind truly believed might, on some level, kill me, have their moment. And for a while, it felt like I was being ripped apart. It felt like I was some kind of spacecraft coming in through the Earth's atmosphere and breaking up. It was violent at first and scary and painful, but I just was able to surrender and surrender. And eventually, the tumult, the agony, the confusion started to coalesce into this sense of falling. And there was just this sense of falling, of plummeting into some kind of abyss. And so somehow I allowed myself to fall, and I was falling and falling and falling, and I just let myself fall. And I lost track of time completely. I have no idea how long I was sitting there, really, maybe an hour. And eventually, the falling stopped, and what I was left with, I was completely unprepared for. I was left with this improbable, unlikely, unexpected peace. I was left with silence. I was left with wonder. I was left with an invincible summer. There was something about experiencing this kind of peace, this kind of wholeness in a moment of my life where I was meant to apparently be feeling terrible, be feeling distraught and lost and hopeless, and yet there was something magical about it. The space that emerged, the space that was located actually in the last place I would have expected to find it, right in the middle of all my pain, was truly magical. And it led me on a path that changed my life forever. It was the first time I really saw with real clarity that suffering, all the flavors and variations of suffering I'd experienced in my life, were not what they seemed. That they were not what they seemed. That depression or anxiety or anger or rage or fear, none of it was what it seemed. I didn't understand back then. This is like 8 years ago. I didn't understand what had actually happened. And there were quite a few years following that of trying to really work out what the hell had actually transpired. Later that day, I found myself at a beach in the sun the day after breaking up with somebody I so desperately wanted to be with for all the wrong reasons. And I was in the water, and I had never felt more alive. And my mind was like, what the hell is going on? How on earth could I be feeling so good in the midst of something so bad? That's the kind of psychological dissonance from which vast change can emanate. So I wanted to share that with you today, and the quote that reminded me of this story. It's from Albert Camus. In the midst of winter, I found there was within me an invincible summer. An invincible summer. So I wonder, do you know what I'm talking about? Have you found that invincible summer within yourself? And if not, have you looked? Have you traveled into perhaps the last place you might expect to find such freedom and peace? Have you traveled deeply and kinesthetically into moments of intense pain and suffering? And if you haven't, how come? What's stopping you? What's the story about why you can't? I'd love to hear how this is for you. I know for sure that within all of us and at the heart of reality itself, there is an invincible summer. Thanks for being with me today.